On the day of my sister's wedding, just as she whispered, "I do," a gun went off. The white of her dress turned crimson in front of 80 horrified guests, and the shooter was none other than the HOA president, a woman who had spent months tormenting my family. That was the moment my world shattered, and it's a sound I'll never unhear. My name is David Martinez. Most people know me as the Chief Justice of the State Supreme Court. But in this story, I'm just a brother, an older brother who failed to protect the little girl I raised after our parents died. Maria was 28, a nurse who saved lives every day, and she was finally about to marry the man she loved. James, a kind-hearted teacher who treated her like gold. They'd spent a year planning their backyard wedding in Willowbrook Gardens, a picturesque neighborhood with picket fences and rose gardens. But behind that postcard charm lurked a tyrant, Karen Whitmore, the HOA president. From the day Maria moved in, Karen made her life miserable. She fined her for parking her car too long in the driveway, claimed her roses were too colorful, and spread rumors that she was lowering property values. But let's not pretend this was about roses or parking. Karen couldn't stand the idea that a young Latina nurse had bought a home in what she considered her perfect whitewashed neighborhood. It escalated when Maria filed for HOA approval to host her wedding in her backyard. She submitted everything by the book guest list parking plan cleanup crew, but Karen denied it with a smug little letter about disturbing the peace. Meanwhile, 3 white families in the same year had their weddings approved without a hitch. Maria was crushed. She'd dreamed of saying her vows beneath the roses she'd planted with her own hands. A church rental was out of reach financially, and every deposit was already locked into the backyard plan. That's when I stepped in. Normally, I keep my role as Chief Justice away from family matters, but watching Karen abuse her power was too much. I called her, directly introduced myself as Judge Martinez, and made it very clear she had no legal grounds to deny Maria's request. She caved within 3 days, but I could feel her resentment boiling. The morning of May 15th, the day of the wedding, started like a dream. Maria was up early, glowing with excitement. Neighbors dropped by to help, friends filled the house with laughter, and by noon the backyard looked like a fairy tale. White chairs lined up in rows, an archway covered in roses, lights strung between the trees. I'll never forget the way Maria looked when I helped her with her veil. She wore our grandmother's gown, simple and elegant, and for a moment I swore I was looking at our mother again. I told her, "They're here with us," and she smiled through her tears. I can feel it. Guests started arriving at 3 o'clock. Family, colleagues, even Maria's patients sent flowers. Everything was perfectly in line with HOA rules. As I walked Maria down the aisle, Canon in D floated through the air, and James stood at the altar already crying. For a brief moment, I thought maybe we'd beaten Karen at her own game. But then I saw her. She was at her second-floor window, arms crossed, glaring down at us like a vulture. Something in my gut told me trouble was coming, but I pushed it aside. It was my sister's wedding day. The ceremony began. The pastor spoke warmly. Maria and James read vows so heartfelt that not a single guest had dry eyes. And then, just as Father Miguel reached the words, "If anyone has reason to object," Karen stormed in through the back gate. Her face was red, twisted with rage, and she screamed, "I object! This wedding is illegal!" The crowd froze. Karen ranted about noise ordinances, parking violations, disturbing the peace, all nonsense. I stood up, reminding her that she herself had approved the event. Maria, bless her heart, pleaded softly, "Karen, please, it's my wedding day. Can't we just have peace?" That word peace lit a fire in Karen's eyes. She launched into a tirade dripping with racism, calling us "you people" and accusing us of invading her neighborhood. And then, in a heartbeat that still replays in slow motion, she pulled a gun from behind her back. Gasps, screams, chaos. Guests dove for cover. I pulled out my phone to call 911. James shielded Maria, and Father Miguel tried to calm her down. Maria, ever the healer, stepped forward. Even facing a gun, she used the same gentle tone she'd use with a terrified patient. "Karen, I know you're hurting. We don't have to be enemies. We can be neighbors. We can find peace. But Karen snarled, her voice cracking, "I don't want your peace. I want you gone." And then she pulled the trigger. The sound was deafening. Maria staggered, then collapsed in her gown, blood spreading across the white fabric. James screamed, falling to his knees beside her. I dropped my phone and ran, pressing my hands against the wound, whispering desperately, "Stay with me, Maria. Stay with me." Her eyes, fading, found mine. "David, I love you," she whispered, and then the light left her. I can't describe what it feels like to lose someone in that way right before your eyes. Rage and grief collided in my chest, but above all, guilt. I was the Chief Justice of the Supreme Court, but in that moment I felt powerless, useless. I'd promised our dying mother I would protect Maria, and when it mattered most, I failed. Part of me wanted to crawl into that hole of despair and never come out. I asked myself over and over, should I have pushed harder to stop Karen earlier? Should I have canceled the wedding, forced Maria to marry somewhere safe? Maybe then she'd still be alive. For weeks, I let those questions eat me alive. But then the truth surfaced, and it shook me awake. Police uncovered months of harassment logs. Karen had compiled her attempts to rally neighbors against Maria, even footage from our elderly neighbor's security camera, Karen practicing with the gun just days before the wedding. This wasn't an accident. It wasn't a moment of rage. It was planned, premeditated, hate dressed up as community values. That realization burned away my despair. I couldn't give Maria back her life, but I could make sure Karen paid for what she did. The trial was grueling. I recused myself from the case, of course, but I was there every single day. Karen's defense tried to spin her as a misunderstood citizen, claiming she only wanted to scare Maria. But 80 witnesses testified to her racist tirade. The video of her target practice sealed the deal. District Attorney Sarah Chin delivered a closing argument. I'll never forget. Karen Whitmore didn't just kill Maria Martinez. She killed a dream. She killed love. She killed a woman whose only crime was being Hispanic in a neighborhood that wasn't hers to control. The jury was out for less than 2 hours, guilty on all counts. At sentencing, I had the chance to stand and deliver my victim impact statement. Looking Karen in the eye was harder than any courtroom battle I'd fought. I told the judge how Maria was more than just my sister. She was a light in every room, a nurse who saved sick children, a neighbor who brought cookies to new families, a woman who wanted to fill her home with laughter and kids. And how Karen snuffed all that out because of hate. Judge Patricia Williams sentenced Karen to life in prison without parole. In the aftermath, the HOA was investigated and dissolved after years of discriminatory enforcement came to light. The neighborhood that once looked picture perfect was exposed for what it was, a place where power had been abused under the guise of rules. Maria's death made national headlines, sparking conversations about housing discrimination and hate crimes. But none of that fills the empty seat at our family table. James sold the house. He couldn't bear to live in the place where he'd watched the love of his life die. I don't blame him. I sometimes drive by, and though a new family lives there now, I can still see it, all the roses, the archway, the lights strung across the trees, and Maria lying there in her gown. 6 months later, I created the Maria Martinez Foundation for Community Healing. We fight housing discrimination, mediate neighborhood disputes before they turn toxic, and give families a place to tell their stories. James, despite his grief, became our first outreach coordinator. He told me Maria always believed you fight hate with love, and he wanted to honor that. I wish I could say I've forgiven Karen. I haven't. Maybe I never will. But I refuse to let hate define me, because Maria's last words, even as she bled out, weren't filled with anger. They were filled with love. Karen thought she had power because she had a title, a clipboard, a set of rules, and eventually a gun. But she was wrong. Real power doesn't come from fear. It comes from compassion, from justice, from lifting people up instead of tearing them down. That's what Maria believed, and that's the world I'll keep fighting for. Hate destroyed my sister's wedding, but it didn't destroy her legacy. Love is stronger, always stronger. And that's the lesson. Hate might win a moment, but love always wins the story.